The dust-laden wind carried Sarah Keller's mournful sobs across the barren plains of Nebraska Territory, 1867, as she clutched her infant son against her chest, rocking back and forth on the weathered porch of a half-finished cabin. Her tears fell upon the child's face, mixing with the dirt from the recent dust storm that had ravaged what little remained of her hopes for a new beginning. Sarah had been alone for 3 months now, ever since her husband Thomas had been thrown from his horse while chasing down a stray calf, his neck broken before he ever hit the ground. The homestead they'd started together stood as an unfinished monument to their shared dreams that now felt as hollow as her empty stomach. The baby, just 6 months old, whimpered against her chest, his little face red from crying. Hunger. It was always hunger these days. Her milk was dwindling as her own body weakened from rationing what little food remained in their stores. "Hush now, Jacob," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mama's here. Mama's got you." But the words felt empty. What good was a mother who couldn't feed her child? Who couldn't finish building the home his father had started? The nearest town was 15 miles away, and with Thomas gone, she had no way to get there for supplies. The small garden she'd managed to plant had withered in the summer heat, having received too little attention while she struggled to keep up with everything else. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats at first, not until they were close enough that the rhythmic thudding cut through her sobs. Sarah tensed, instinctively holding Jacob tighter. Visitors were rare out here and not always welcome. Indians sometimes passed through these parts, and while most kept their distance, stories of raids on isolated homesteads traveled fast among the scattered settlers. Squinting against the setting sun, she made out the silhouette of a lone rider approaching from the west. A cowboy, by the look of him, with a wide-brimmed hat and a bandana pulled up against the dust. Her free hand moved to the shotgun, propped against the porch railing the one Thomas had taught her to use, just in case. The rider slowed as he approached, seemingly sensing her wariness. When he was about 20 yards from the cabin, he stopped his horse and raised both hands to show he meant no harm. "Evening, madam," he called out, his voice carrying easily on the prairie wind. "Don't mean to intrude. Name's Mitchell Vance. I work for the Lazy S Ranch about 10 miles west. Was out looking for strays when I saw your place." Sarah didn't lower the shotgun. "We don't have any of your cattle here, mister," the cowboy Mitchell nodded slowly. "Wasn't suggesting you did, madam. Just noticed smoke from your chimney and thought I'd check if everything was all right. Not many folks out this way." He lowered his bandana, revealing a face younger than she'd expected, maybe 25 or 26, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something striking about him all the same. "We're fine," Sarah replied, though her tear-streaked face and the baby's cries suggested otherwise. Mitchell Vance shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable with calling out her obvious lie but too polite to do so directly. "Forgive me for saying so, madam, but that little one sounds mighty hungry." Jacob chose that moment to let out another pitiful wail, and Sarah felt fresh tears welling up. "My husband's dead," she blurted out, not knowing why she was telling this stranger her troubles. 3 months now. Our supplies are running low, and I can't leave to get more with the baby." Something in Mitchell's expression softened. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, and reached into his saddlebag. Sarah tensed again, but when his hand emerged, it held a small package wrapped in oilcloth. "Got some jerky and hardtack here," he said, holding it out. "Not much, but it's yours if you want it." Sarah hesitated, pride warring with necessity. The baby's cries grew louder. "Please," Mitchell said quietly. "I'd feel better knowing you had something." After a moment, Sarah nodded, lowering the shotgun. "Thank you," she whispered. Mitchell approached cautiously, setting the package on the porch steps before backing away respectfully. "You got a name, madam?" Sarah Keller. "And this is Jacob." Mitchell nodded, glancing around the property with an appraising eye. The unfinished walls of what would have been a barn, the garden overtaken by weeds, the broken fence that needed mending. "You planning to stay out here, Mrs. Keller?" "I don't have anywhere else to go," Sarah admitted, shifting Jacob to her shoulder to pat his back. "This land is ours. Thomas and we put everything we had into it." Mitchell nodded again, understanding written across his features. Many had come west with dreams only to find hardship instead. "If you don't mind my saying so, it's a lot for one person to manage, especially with a little one." "I'm aware," Sarah replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. Mitchell held up his hands. "No offense meant, just, well, I could come back tomorrow, maybe help with some of the bigger jobs. That barn won't hold through winter as it is." Sarah stared at him, searching for ulterior motives but finding only what appeared to be genuine concern. Still, she'd learned to be cautious. "Why would you do that? You don't know me," Mitchell shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "My ma raised me to believe we help folks when they need it." No strings attached. He glanced at Jacob, who had quieted somewhat but still fussed against Sarah's shoulder. "Besides, I've got 2 days before I need to be back at the ranch." Sarah considered the offer. Pride told her to refuse, but practicality and her son's needs argued otherwise. "I can't pay you." "Wasn't asking for payment," Mitchell replied simply. After a long moment, Sarah nodded. "All right, Mr. Vance, I'd be grateful for the help." "Mitchell," he corrected with a small smile. "Mr. Vance is my pa, and he's a much more serious sort than I am." For the first time in months, Sarah felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. "Mitchell, then." He tipped his hat and returned to his horse. "I'll be back at first light, Mrs. Keller. Try to get some rest." As she watched him ride away, Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. She didn't know this man, this cowboy who'd appeared out of nowhere with jerky and promises of help. But as she looked down at Jacob, now quieter as he sensed his mother's changed mood, she knew she had little choice but to accept whatever assistance came her way. That night, after feeding Jacob a thin gruel made from the hardtack Mitchell had provided, Sarah sat by the window, watching the vast expanse of stars above the prairie. For the first time since Thomas's death, she allowed herself to wonder if perhaps they might survive after all. True to his word, Mitchell arrived just as dawn was breaking across the eastern horizon. Sarah had been up for an hour already, having slept fitfully, constantly waking to check on Jacob and to listen for any sounds that might indicate danger. The baby was still asleep in the small cradle Thomas had built before his death, one of the few pieces of furniture they possessed. Mitchell rode up leading a second horse, this one pulling a small cart loaded with lumber, tools, and what appeared to be supplies. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to tamp down the flutter of relief she felt at seeing him actually return. "Morning, Mrs. Keller," he called, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "Brought some things I thought might help." "You didn't have to do that," she said, but the gratitude in her voice was evident. Mitchell shrugged. "Foreman at the Lazy S owed me a favor, figured this was a good use for it." He began unloading the cart, revealing sacks of flour, beans, salt, coffee, and even a small crate of apples. There was also a side of bacon wrapped in cloth. Sarah's eyes widened. "This is too much. I can't accept, you can and you will," Mitchell interrupted gently. "For the boy's sake, if nothing else." At the mention of Jacob, Sarah's resolve weakened. She hadn't eaten properly in weeks, saving what little they had for making milk for her son. The sight of real food made her stomach clench painfully. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing any further protest would be both ungrateful and foolish. Mitchell nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her thanks. "Thought I'd start on that barn today if that's all right with you. Won't survive the first snow as it is." "Yes, of course," Sarah agreed, then hesitated. "I can help. I'm stronger than I look." Mitchell assessed her thin frame, the dark circles under her eyes, and shook his head. No offense meant, Mrs. Keller, but you look like you haven't had a proper meal or a full night's sleep in months. Why don't you take care of yourself and the little one today? I've built enough barns to manage this one. Sarah wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy. At least let me make you breakfast first. It's the least I can do. Mitchell smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. Now that's an offer I won't refuse. Been eating my own cooking too long. Inside the cabin, Sarah set about preparing a meal while Mitchell brought in the supplies. The single room was sparsely furnished but meticulously clean. A cast iron stove stood against one wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs in the center, and a narrow bed pushed against the opposite wall. Jacob's cradle sat near the bed, and the baby was just beginning to stir. Mitchell set down the last of the supplies and watched as Sarah moved to pick up her son. There was something both heartbreaking and beautiful about the way she gathered the child in her arms, murmuring soft words of comfort despite her own obvious exhaustion. "He's a fine-looking boy," Mitchell observed, keeping a respectful distance. Sarah smiled down at Jacob, who blinked sleepily up at her. "He looks like his father," she said softly, a hint of pain crossing her features before she schooled them back to neutrality. "Would you mind watching him while I cook? He can sit in his cradle." Mitchell suddenly looked terrified. "I don't know much about babies, Mrs. Keller." Sarah couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her, the first genuine laugh in months. "You don't have to do anything. Just make sure he doesn't roll out while I'm at the stove." Mitchell nodded, approaching the cradle with the caution of a man facing a rattlesnake. Jacob regarded the stranger with solemn curiosity, his tiny fists waving in the air. As Sarah prepared a simple breakfast of bacon and biscuits, she stole glances at Mitchell, who had gone from looking terrified to utterly fascinated by the baby. He cautiously offered Jacob a finger, which the infant promptly grabbed with surprising strength. "Strong grip," Mitchell commented, sounding impressed. "He's determined," Sarah replied, turning the bacon in the pan. "Even when things are at their worst, he never gives up." Mitchell looked up at her, his expression serious. "Like his mother, I'd wager." Sarah busied herself with the cooking, uncomfortable with the unexpected compliment. When breakfast was ready, they ate in relative silence, the food disappearing quickly from Mitchell's plate. Sarah ate more slowly, savoring each bite, her body almost trembling with the relief of proper nourishment. "This is the best meal I've had in months," Mitchell said appreciatively as he finished his second helping of biscuits. "It's just bacon and biscuits," Sarah replied, but she was pleased nonetheless. "Better than anything I can make," Mitchell assured her. "Been living on beans and jerky so long I almost forgot what real food tastes like." After breakfast, Mitchell headed out to work on the barn while Sarah tended to Jacob and the household chores. Throughout the morning, she could hear the rhythmic sound of hammering, occasionally punctuated by a colorful curse when something didn't go as planned. By midday, curiosity got the better of her, and with Jacob settled for a nap, she ventured out to see his progress. The change was already remarkable. Mitchell had shored up the sagging frame and was in the process of adding proper walls. His shirt was off in the midday heat, revealing sun-bronzed skin stretched over lean muscle, evidence of years of hard physical labor. Sarah caught herself staring and quickly looked away, a flush rising to her cheeks. "You've accomplished a lot," she called, keeping her eyes firmly on the barn rather than on him. Mitchell turned, grabbing his shirt and pulling it back on when he noticed her approach. "Coming along," he agreed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Should have the frame secure by nightfall. Tomorrow I can work on the roof." "I've made some lunch if you're hungry," Sarah offered. Mitchell smiled that transformative smile again. "Starving, actually. Thank you." Over a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Sarah found herself opening up about her life before coming to Nebraska. She told Mitchell about growing up in Pennsylvania, about meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 18, about their decision to head west after the war had left so little opportunity back east. Thomas had such dreams for this place, she said, gazing out the window at the half-finished homestead. He could see it all so clearly: the crops we'd grow, the cattle we'd raise, the family we'd build. Her voice caught. Now it's just Jacob and me, and I don't know if I can make those dreams come true alone. Mitchell was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Dreams can change, Mrs. Keller. Doesn't mean they die with the dreamer. Sarah, she said suddenly. If you're Mitchell, then I'm Sarah. Mrs. Keller makes me feel like my mother-in-law. Mitchell nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sarah, then. There was something in the way he said her name that made her stomach flutter, a sensation she immediately tried to suppress. Her husband had been dead only 3 months. She had no business feeling anything for this stranger, no matter how kind he'd been. Tell me about yourself, she said, changing the subject. How did you end up working at the Lazy S? Mitchell leaned back in his chair, his long fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee. Not much to tell. Grew up in Missouri. Pa had a small farm, but it wasn't enough to support all 5 of us kids. Headed west when I turned 18, worked my way from ranch to ranch. Been at the Lazy S for about 3 years now. Do you like it? The cowboy life? Mitchell considered the question. Most days, it's hard work and lonely sometimes, but there's a freedom to it that suits me. He glanced around the cabin. Though I admit, lately I've been thinking it might be nice to have a place of my own someday. A home, not just a bunk in a ranch house. Something passed between them then, a moment of understanding that made Sarah look away first. You should get back to work, she said, rising to clear the plates. And I need to check on Jacob. Mitchell nodded, standing as well. Thank you for lunch. The rest of the day passed in a comfortable rhythm, with Mitchell working on the barn and Sarah tending to Jacob and the house. By sunset, the framework of the barn was indeed secure, and Mitchell had even managed to begin work on one of the walls. As darkness fell, Sarah insisted Mitchell stay for dinner rather than ride back to wherever he'd made camp the night before. They ate by lamplight, Jacob dozing in his cradle nearby, the conversation flowing more easily now that they'd spent a day in each other's company. I should head out, Mitchell said finally, though he made no move to rise from the table. Got an early start tomorrow if I want to finish that roof. Sarah nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. The cabin had felt less empty today, less haunted by memories and regrets. Of course. Mitchell stood, reaching for his hat. I'll be back at dawn. Mitchell, Sarah said impulsively, there's a bedroll in the trunk by the door. Thomas used it when he went hunting. You're welcome to sleep in the barn if you'd rather not ride out tonight. Mitchell looked surprised, then grateful. That's mighty kind of you, Sarah, if you're sure it's no trouble. No trouble, she assured him, telling herself the offer was purely practical. The truth was, she felt safer knowing he was nearby. After Mitchell had gone to the barn with the bedroll, Sarah sat for a long time by Jacob's cradle, watching her sons sleep peacefully. For the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't cry herself to sleep that night. The second day followed much the same pattern as the first, with Mitchell working tirelessly on the barn while Sarah tended to Jacob and the household. By mid-afternoon, the barn had a proper roof and walls, lacking only doors and some interior work to be complete. Sarah watched from the porch as Mitchell hammered the last shingle into place, admiring not just his craftsmanship, but the way he moved with such confidence and purpose. When he climbed down from the roof and saw her watching, he grinned and gestured proudly at his handiwork. "What do you think?" he called. "It's wonderful," Sarah replied honestly. "Thomas would have been impressed." Something flickered across Mitchell's face, a momentary hesitation at the mention of her husband before he nodded. "High praise, then." Sarah shifted Jacob to her other hip. The baby was in good spirits today, babbling and reaching for everything in sight. "Would you like some water?" "You must be thirsty." Mitchell approached, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Water would be mighty welcome, thank you." As Sarah handed him the dipper from the water bucket, their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected jolt through her. She pulled back quickly, flustered by her reaction. Mitchell either didn't notice or politely pretended not to. He drank deeply, then handed the dipper back with careful precision to avoid another touch. "Think I'll start on the chicken coop next, if that's all right with you." Sarah blinked in surprise. "The chicken coop? But you said you only had 2 days before you needed to return to the ranch." Mitchell looked away, suddenly very interested in adjusting his hat. "Sent word to the foreman yesterday that I'd be a few days late. He understands." "You did that for us?" Sarah asked softly. Mitchell met her gaze then, something unreadable in his eyes. "Seems like the right thing to do." Before Sarah could respond, Jacob let out a squeal and reached for Mitchell, nearly toppling out of his mother's arms in his enthusiasm. Both adults instinctively moved to steady the child, their hands meeting over Jacob's small body. This time, neither pulled away immediately. "He likes you," Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible over her pounding heart. "Smart kid," Mitchell replied with a small smile, gently disentangling his hand from hers and taking a step back. "Best get back to work while the light's good." That evening, as they sat at the table after dinner, Mitchell pulled something from his pocket and set it on the table between them. It was a small wooden horse, roughly carved but recognizable, with surprising detail in the flowing mane and alert ears. "Made this last night," he explained, looking almost embarrassed. "Thought Jacob might like it when he's a bit older." Sarah picked up the little horse, turning it over in her hands, touched beyond words by the simple gesture. "You made this? For Jacob?" Mitchell shrugged. "Not much to do in a barn after dark. My pa taught me to whittle when I was a boy, said it kept idle hands busy and out of trouble." Sarah looked up at him, really looked at him, seeing beyond the helpful cowboy to the man beneath kind, skilled, thoughtful. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Mitchell held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, then he cleared his throat and stood. "Should probably turn in. Morning comes early." That night, Sarah dreamed of Thomas for the first time in weeks. In the dream, he was smiling at her, nodding toward the barn where Mitchell slept, as if giving his blessing. She woke with tears on her cheeks, but they weren't entirely tears of sadness. The days stretched into a week, then 2. Mitchell stayed, finding more projects that needed attention around the homestead, fixing the roof on the cabin, mending fences, digging a proper well closer to the house. Sarah stopped asking when he would return to the Lazy S, and he stopped mentioning it. They fell into a comfortable routine. Mitchell would work from dawn till dusk, coming in for meals that grew more substantial as Sarah's confidence in their supplies increased. In the evenings, they would sit at the table, talking about everything and nothing his childhood in Missouri. Her dreams of learning to play the piano, books they had read, places they hoped to see someday. Jacob thrived under the attention of 2 adults, growing plumper and more active with each passing day. He took to Mitchell immediately, reaching for him whenever he entered the cabin, gurgling happily when the cowboy spoke to him in the deep, gentle voice he reserved for the baby. Mitchell, for his part, overcame his initial nervousness around the infant and became surprisingly adept at holding Jacob, even volunteering to rock him to sleep on evenings when Sarah looked particularly tired. The sight of the tall, rugged cowboy cradling her son with such tenderness never failed to stir something deep in Sarah's heart. Yet, despite their growing closeness, neither spoke of feelings beyond friendship. Sarah still wore Thomas's ring, and Mitchell respected the invisible boundary it represented. He slept in the barn, declined her tentative invitation to attend Sunday services with her in town, and always maintained a careful physical distance between them until the storm came. It was late September, and the weather had been turning cooler. Mitchell had been working on preparing the garden for spring planting, turning over the soil and adding manure from the neighboring farm's cattle. Sarah had been hanging laundry, enjoying the crisp autumn air, when she noticed the dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. "Mitchell," she called, pointing toward the ominous wall of black that was rapidly approaching. "Storm's coming." Mitchell straightened, wiping sweat from his brow as he assessed the clouds. His expression grew serious. "That's no ordinary storm, looks like a big one." They worked quickly to secure everything around the homestead, bringing in the laundry, closing up the barn and chicken coop, making sure the water barrels were covered. By the time they finished, the wind had picked up significantly, driving dust and debris before it. "Get inside," Mitchell urged, practically shouting to be heard over the rising gale. "I'll make sure the horses are secure in the barn." Sarah nodded, hurrying to the cabin with Jacob clutched against her chest. Inside, she moved quickly to close the shutters and light the lamps, the cabin growing dark as the storm clouds blotted out the afternoon sun. Jacob, sensing his mother's tension, began to fuss. "It's all right, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, bouncing him gently. "Just a storm, we're safe inside." But as the minutes ticked by with no sign of Mitchell, Sarah's anxiety grew. The wind was howling now, rattling the shutters and sending eerie moans through the chimney. Rain began to lash against the cabin in horizontal sheets, driven by the ferocious wind. When the door finally burst open, Sarah cried out in relief. Mitchell staggered in, drenched to the skin, his hat gone, his hair plastered to his head. "The horses are safe," he reported, closing the door with difficulty against the wind's force. "But this is no ordinary thunderstorm. I think it might be a tornado brewing." Sarah's face paled. She'd heard stories of tornadoes that could lift entire houses off their foundations, leaving nothing but splinters behind. "What do we do?" Mitchell was already moving, grabbing the table and dragging it to one corner of the cabin. "Get under here with Jacob. It's the strongest piece of furniture you have." Sarah didn't argue, quickly sliding beneath the solid oak table with her son. Mitchell grabbed blankets from the bed and tucked them around them, then began to move around the cabin, extinguishing lamps to reduce the risk of fire. A tremendous crack of thunder shook the cabin, making Sarah jump. Jacob began to wail in earnest now, his little face red with fear. Outside, the wind's howl had taken on a new, more terrifying quality, a roar that seemed to fill the world. "Mitchell," Sarah called, extending her hand toward him. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees beside the table. Without hesitation, he crawled in beside her, pulling both her and Jacob against his chest as the cabin shuddered around them. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. "Both of you, I'm not going anywhere." Sarah buried her face against his shoulder, one arm holding Jacob securely between them, the other clutching Mitchell's shirt. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm, belying his calm exterior. For what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, they huddled together as the storm raged. The roar of the wind was deafening, punctuated by crashes as debris struck the cabin. Sarah prayed silently for Jacob, for Mitchell, for the home they had worked so hard to build. When the worst of the storm finally passed, they remained under the table, Mitchell's arms still wrapped protectively around them. Jacob had exhausted himself with crying and had fallen into an uneasy sleep against his mother's breast. "I think it's over," Mitchell whispered eventually, his breath warm against Sarah's hair. She nodded but made no move to leave the safety of his embrace. "Thank you," she murmured, "for staying with us." Mitchell's arms tightened fractionally around her. "I told you I'm not going anywhere." There was a weight to his words that made Sarah look up, meeting his gaze in the dim light of the cabin. The intensity she found there stole her breath. "Mitchell." Before she could continue, he gently released her and moved to extricate himself from beneath the table. "Should check the damage," he said, his voice gruff. "Make sure the roof's still intact." Sarah nodded, suddenly cold without his warmth. She carefully laid Jacob on the blankets and followed Mitchell out from under the table. The cabin had survived remarkably well. A few leaks in the roof, a broken window, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. The barn and chicken coop had fared similarly well, testament to Mitchell's solid construction. Some fencing had been damaged, and debris was scattered across the property, but overall, they had been fortunate. As they stood on the porch surveying the aftermath, the setting sun broke through the retreating storm clouds, bathing everything in a golden glow. The air smelled clean and new, the land washed fresh by the rain. "Could have been much worse," Mitchell observed, his shoulder just brushing against Sarah's. "Yes," she agreed, but her mind wasn't on the storm anymore. It was on the feel of his arms around her, the steady beat of his heart against her palm, the way he had promised not to leave. That night, Mitchell didn't go to the barn. With the roof still leaking in places, Sarah insisted he sleep on a pallet by the fire. They spoke little as they prepared for bed, an unaccustomed awkwardness between them. As Sarah lay in her bed, listening to Mitchell's even breathing from across the room, she twisted Thomas's ring on her finger. For the first time, it felt heavy, a burden rather than a comfort. She thought of her dream of Thomas smiling and nodding toward the barn, giving his blessing. "Thomas," she whispered into the darkness, so quietly that Mitchell couldn't possibly hear, "I'll always love you. But I think my heart has room for loving him too." Morning dawned clear and beautiful, as if the storm had never happened. Sarah woke to find Mitchell already up, building a fire in the stove. Jacob was awake in his cradle, contentedly gumming his wooden horse. "Morning," Mitchell said, glancing up with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thought I'd get breakfast started." "You deserved to sleep in after yesterday." Sarah sat up, pushing her hair from her face. "Thank you." They moved around each other carefully as they prepared for the day, neither mentioning the intimacy they had shared during the storm. By unspoken agreement, they focused instead on the work that needed to be done repairing the roof, mending fences, clearing debris. It was late afternoon when Sarah finally found the courage to broach the subject that had been weighing on her mind. Mitchell was on the roof, hammering a replacement shingle into place while she stood below, handing up materials as needed. "Mitchell," she called, squinting up at him against the sun. "We need to talk." He paused, hammer poised mid-strike. "About yesterday, the storm, us." Mitchell's shoulders tensed visibly. After a moment, he resumed hammering, each strike more forceful than necessary. "Nothing to talk about. I was just doing what anyone would do in that situation." Sarah stood her ground. "No, you weren't, and it wasn't just yesterday. It's been building for weeks now." Mitchell finally set down the hammer and turned to look at her. "Sarah, you're still grieving your husband. I understand that. I respect it." "Yes, I'm grieving," Sarah acknowledged. "I'll always love Thomas. He gave me Jacob, this land, 3 wonderful years of marriage. But Thomas is gone and I'm still here. Jacob is still here, and so are you." Mitchell's expression was unreadable. "What are you saying?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I think Thomas would want me to be happy. To find someone who could love Jacob as his own, who could help me build the life we dreamed of." "And you think that someone could be me?" Mitchell's voice was carefully neutral. "I think it already is you," Sarah replied softly. "You've been here every day for weeks, Mitchell. You've rebuilt our barn, fixed our roof, dug us a well. You carved a toy for my son. You held us during the storm and promised you weren't going anywhere." She paused, her heart pounding. "Did you mean that?" For a long moment, Mitchell was silent, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then, with deliberate movements, he descended the ladder until he stood before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I meant it," he said finally, his voice low and serious. "From the moment I saw you rocking Jacob on that porch, something in me knew I was supposed to be here, not just to help with the building, but to be part of what you're building." He hesitated, then continued. "I care for you, Sarah. For Jacob, too. More than I thought possible after knowing you such a short time." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I care for you, too." Mitchell reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I need you to be sure, Sarah, because if I stay, it won't be just as a hired hand or a friend. I want more than that." In answer, Sarah stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was both an ending and a beginning the end of her solitary grief, the beginning of something new and full of promise. When they separated, Mitchell's eyes were bright with emotion. "I should finish the roof," he murmured, though he made no move to step away. Sarah smiled up at him. "It can wait until tomorrow." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jacob asleep inside, Mitchell reached into his pocket and pulled out another carved figure. This one was a woman, holding a child, her face upturned as if looking toward the future. "Been working on this one a while," he admitted, placing it in Sarah's hands. "Wasn't sure I'd ever have the courage to give it to you." Sarah traced the delicate features of the wooden figure, recognizing herself and Jacob in the simple but evocative carving. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "There's room for one more," Mitchell said quietly. "If you'd want that someday." Sarah looked up at him, understanding his meaning. "I would, someday." Mitchell's smile was like the sunrise, full of promise and warmth. "Then someday it will be." 6 months later, on a bright spring morning with wildflowers blooming across the prairie, Sarah stood beneath an arch of early roses that Mitchell had constructed specially for the occasion. Jacob, now walking on unsteady legs, toddled between them, clutching his wooden horse in one fist. The small gathering of neighbors and friends from town watched as Sarah and Mitchell exchanged simple vows, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Mitchell swept Sarah into a kiss that left no doubt of his feelings, much to the delight and good-natured laughter of those assembled. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with fiddle music and dancing, a feast prepared by the neighboring women, and more than a few tears of happiness shed by those who had witnessed Sarah's journey from grief-stricken widow to radiant bride. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across what was now the Vance homestead, Mitchell found Sarah standing on the porch, watching Jacob play in the yard with the children of their neighbors. "Happy, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Sarah leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "More than I ever thought possible again." Mitchell pressed a kiss to her temple. "I have something for you." From behind his back, he produced a small wooden figure, a man, a woman, and a child, carved from a single piece of wood, their forms flowing into one another in an unbroken circle. A family, Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the gift. "It's perfect." "Not quite," Mitchell murmured, his hand moving to rest gently on her stomach, where the slightest of curves was just becoming visible beneath her wedding dress. "But it will be." Sarah covered his hand with her own, marveling at how life could change so completely in less than a year. From the depths of despair, rocking her son alone in tears, to this moment of perfect happiness. "I love you, Mitchell Vance," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "And I love you, Sarah Vance," he replied, bending to kiss her as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above their home. 2 years later, the Vance homestead had flourished beyond what either Sarah or Mitchell could have imagined that first day when he rode up to find her rocking Jacob on the porch. The barn was now filled with horses and milk cows, the chicken coop bustled with activity, and fields of wheat and corn stretched to the horizon, promising a bountiful harvest. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house, with 3 bedrooms, a kitchen large enough for Sarah to teach her daughter Lily, now 1 year old, to bake alongside her someday, and a parlor where the long-dreamed-of piano had finally found a home. Jacob, now 3, was the spitting image of his father Thomas, but his mannerisms and determined spirit were increasingly reminiscent of Mitchell, who had adopted him legally soon after their marriage. The boy followed his stepfather everywhere, soaking up knowledge about horses and cattle, farming and building, his little hands always eager to help with whatever project Mitchell was working on. Lily, born with Mitchell's dark hair and Sarah's bright blue eyes, was adored by her entire family, especially her big brother who had appointed himself her protector from the moment She was brought home from the midwife's house in town. On a warm summer evening, Sarah sat on the expanded porch, rocking Lily while watching Mitchell and Jacob in the yard. They were working on a new wooden horse, larger than the original toy that Jacob still treasured. This one would be big enough for him to sit on, Mitchell had explained, teaching him about measurements and wood types as they worked. Sarah smiled, watching Mitchell patiently guide Jacob's small hands as they sanded the wood together. The tenderness with which Mitchell treated the boy, never once distinguishing between his biological child and the son of his heart, was one of the countless reasons she loved him more with each passing day. As if sensing her thoughts, Mitchell looked up, catching her eye with a smile that still made her heart skip a beat. He said something to Jacob, who nodded eagerly and continued sanding while Mitchell crossed the yard to join Sarah on the porch. "How are my girls?" he asked, sitting beside her and gently touching Lily's dark curls. "Perfect," Sarah replied, leaning over to kiss him softly. "Just like our boys." Mitchell's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone casual though Sarah could detect an undercurrent of excitement. "The Sanderson place next door is going up for sale. Jim's moving his family back east to care for his ailing mother." Sarah nodded, having heard the news in town the previous week. "It's good land. Someone will snap it up quickly." "I was thinking maybe that someone should be us," Mitchell suggested, watching her face carefully for her reaction. "We could expand our operation, grow more wheat, maybe even start raising more cattle. Jacob will need something substantial to inherit someday, and Lily too." Sarah considered the idea. The Sanderson property would nearly double their holdings, and with the profits from this year's harvest, they could afford it without overextending themselves. "You really think we're ready for that?" Mitchell nodded confidently. "We've built something good here, Sarah, something that can grow and sustain this family for generations to come." He hesitated, then added with a hopeful smile, "Maybe even more family someday." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Mitchell Vance, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" His smile turned sheepish. "Well, Jacob and Lily are the light of my life, but I always did imagine a big family, maybe another boy or girl, or both." Sarah pretended to consider this seriously, though her heart was already singing with joy at the thought. "I suppose we would need the extra land in that case." Mitchell's face lit up with hope. "Does that mean you're agreeable to both propositions?" In answer, Sarah shifted Lily to one arm and used her free hand to guide Mitchell's to rest on her stomach. "I'm already agreeable to at least one of them," she whispered. Mitchell's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "Sarah, are you saying?" She nodded, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Dr. Morris confirmed it yesterday when I went into town for supplies. We're having another baby, Mitchell. Come winter, there'll be one more Vance in this house." Mitchell let out a whoop of joy that startled Lily and made Jacob look up from his sanding with curiosity. In one fluid motion, Mitchell scooped Lily from Sarah's arms, set her safely in the cradle they kept on the porch, and then pulled Sarah to her feet and into a spinning embrace that left her breathless with laughter. "Pa," Jacob called, abandoning his project to trot over to the porch. "Why are you spinning, Ma?" Mitchell set Sarah gently on her feet but kept one arm firmly around her waist. "Because I'm happy, son. Your Ma has just given me the best news." Jacob looked between them curiously. "What news?" Sarah and Mitchell exchanged a glance, silently agreeing. Sarah knelt down to Jacob's level, taking his small hands in hers. "Jacob, how would you feel about being a big brother again, like you are for Lily?" Jacob's eyes widened. "Another baby." "That's right," Mitchell confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. "Another little brother or sister for you to help us take care of. You're such a good helper with Lily, we thought you might like another baby to look after too." Jacob considered this seriously, his young face scrunched in thought. "Will the new baby like horses too, like me and Pa?" Sarah laughed, her heart overflowing with love for this thoughtful child. "I'm sure the baby will love horses, especially if you and Pa teach them all about them. This seemed to satisfy Jacob, who nodded decisively. Okay then, I'll be the best big brother ever, again. I know you will, sweetheart, Sarah assured him, pulling him into a hug. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Mitchell sat on the porch swing Mitchell had built the previous summer, watching the fireflies dance over the fields that stretched out before their home. I never thought I could be this happy again, Sarah confessed, her head resting on Mitchell's shoulder. After Thomas died, I was so sure my life was over too. I was just existing for Jacob's sake. Mitchell's arm tightened around her. I know. I still remember the sight of you rocking him, tears on your face. It nearly broke my heart. Sarah turned to look up at him. You saved us, you know, not just by fixing the barn or bringing supplies, but by showing me that life could be beautiful again. Mitchell shook his head, his expression serious. No, Sarah, you saved yourself. You were already fighting for Jacob, for this land, for the future. I just had the good fortune to be allowed to join you in that fight. He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. And now look at all we've built together. Sarah covered his hand with her own. I want to buy the Sanderson place, she said decisively. You're right, our family is growing, and our dreams should grow with it. Mitchell's smile was radiant in the moonlight. I'll ride into town tomorrow to speak with the bank. They sat in contented silence for a while longer, planning their future in the quiet of the night. Eventually, Sarah spoke again, her voice soft with memory. Do you still have that first wooden horse you carved for Jacob? The one you brought the day after we met. Mitchell nodded. Of course. Jacob keeps it on the shelf above his bed, says it's special because it was the first thing I ever gave him. Sarah smiled, remembering that day so clearly how the simple toy had represented so much more than just a plaything. It had been the first tangible sign that Mitchell saw a future with them, that he cared not just for her but for her son as well. You know, she said thoughtfully, that little horse changed everything. Before you came, I was just surviving. After you gave Jacob that toy, I started to believe we might actually live again. Mitchell kissed her temple tenderly. Then I'm glad I carved it, though I have to admit it wasn't entirely selfless. I was already half in love with both of you by then. Sarah laughed softly. Only half. Well, maybe 3/4, Mitchell conceded with a grin. The rest followed pretty quickly after. As the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind whispered through the tall grass, Sarah Vance closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here from deepest despair to this perfect happiness. From a grieving widow rocking her son, alone, to the heart of a thriving family with a future as vast as the Nebraska sky above them. And somewhere in that starry expanse, she liked to think that Thomas was looking down, pleased with the life she and Mitchell had built, happy that his son was growing up loved and secure, content that his dreams for this land were being fulfilled beyond what even he could have imagined. The wooden horse that had started it all still sat on Jacob's shelf, a simple token of love that had heralded the beginning of their shared story, a story that would continue to unfold across the seasons and years, through joys and sorrows, births and milestones, always grounded in the love that had blossomed so unexpectedly on a lonely homestead, when a cowboy with a kind heart and skilled hands had stopped to help a grieving mother and her son. I love you, Mitchell Vance, Sarah whispered, nestling closer to her husband as the night deepened around them. And I love you, Sarah Vance, he replied, his voice a promise that would echo through all their tomorrows. Always and forever.